In modern life, it's easy to get lost in a sea of constant comparisons. Social media bombards us with images of perfect lives, and society constantly demands us to be more, have more, and do more. But what happens when we look for approval in places where we will never find it? We feel empty, insecure, and our self-esteem falters. This is where Stoicism offers us a radical but liberating alternative. A life guided by inner principles, where the real value is in how we respond to situations, not in the situations themselves. Imagine for a moment a self-esteem that is unaffected by the ups and downs of life. Rejection, criticism, failure, nothing can bring it down. This is what the Stoics taught, that we can build an inner fortress so solid that no external storm can topple it. And it is not only possible, it is necessary to live a full, peaceful, and truly empowered life. When we talk about self-esteem, we often do so from the perspective of how others perceive us, how much they value or appreciate us. But Stoicism, a philosophy born more than 2,000 years ago, invites us to rethink this view completely. Instead of focusing on external approval, the Stoics invite us to develop a self-esteem that does not depend on external factors, a self-esteem that is indestructible because it is born from within, from our own judgment and actions. First key, recognize that value is in your character, not in what you possess. One of the most common traps we fall into when it comes to self-esteem is to believe that our value as people depends on what we own, money, property, professional success, or even the relationships we have. But the Stoics, with their clear vision of what really matters, remind us that true value is in our character, not in our possessions or external achievements. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, said, "Wealth does not consist in having great possessions, but in having few needs." This phrase shows us that value is not in accumulating things, but in cultivating a strong and virtuous character. When you realize this, you begin to free yourself from the constant desire to have more or to compare yourself with others based on what you have or don't have. And that is one of the most important keys to building indestructible self-esteem. Think about this for a moment. Material possessions, social status, even the success you achieve in your career, are things that can disappear overnight. Economic setbacks, crises, or simply the passage of time can take away those things you value so much. If your self-esteem is tied to them, it's like building a house on sand. Any change in your circumstances can bring it all crashing down. But if your self-esteem is based on your character, how you act and who you are at your core, nothing and no one can tear it down. The Stoics believed that true success in life is living according to virtue, not accumulating wealth or recognition. Marcus Aurelius made it clear when he said, "The soul is colored by the color of its thoughts." This means that what really defines your value is the quality of your thoughts, your decisions, and your character, not what you have or what you achieve. If you cultivate a strong character based on wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage, your self-esteem will be unshakable because it will be rooted in something that no one can take away from you. And how does this affect your self-esteem on a day-to-day basis? When you focus on strengthening your character, you stop looking outside for validation. You stop measuring your worth based on what you have, what you've accomplished, or how others perceive you. Instead, you begin to value what really matters, your actions, your intentions, and how you treat others. Not only does this give you a stronger self-esteem, but it also frees you from that constant race to have more or be more in the eyes of others. Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you stopped worrying so much about what you own or what others think of you and focused solely on being the best version of yourself. That's the Stoic approach. In the end, all we really possess is our character, and it is the only thing that remains constant throughout life. Seneca also said, "Nothing is enough for those for whom enough is little." This reflects the idea that if you base your self-esteem on what you have or what you achieve, you will never be enough. You will always want more and you will always feel insufficient. But if you realize that your value lies in your character, you discover that you already have everything you need to feel full and confident. So, instead of asking yourself how much you have or how much you have accomplished, ask yourself, what kind of person am I? Am I acting with integrity and virtue? If the answer is yes, then you are already building an indestructible self-esteem, because what you possess may come and go, but your character is what defines your true value, and that is in your hands. When you adopt this perspective, you free yourself from external expectations and that constant need to accumulate more to feel valuable. You begin to understand that your value is something you carry within you that no one can take away from you. Second key, don't get swept away by emotions. Stay calm. This is one of the most profound lessons of Stoicism and, at the same time, one of the most difficult to apply in daily life. Learn not to get carried away by our emotions. The Stoics were not against feeling emotions. We are human and emotions are an inevitable part of our experience, but what they did advocate is that we should not allow those emotions to take control of our actions or our perception of ourselves. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "The soul is tinged with the color of its thoughts." This means that our emotions, which often arise from our interpretations and thoughts, can distort our view of the world and ourselves. If we are not aware of this, we can easily fall into the cycle of anxiety, anger, or sadness, affecting our self-esteem and our decisions. Imagine for a moment that you are having a bad day at work or arguing with someone close to you. Emotions begin to surface: frustration, anger, sadness. And if you don't manage them well, it's easy for those emotions to make you feel insecure, question your worth, or cause you to act impulsively. But this is where the Stoics offer a powerful alternative. Instead of letting those emotions dominate your behavior, stop, observe them, and decide how to respond. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you that disturbs you, but how you interpret what happens to you." This means that the real cause of our distress or insecurity is not what happens to us, but how we react to it. If we learn to control our interpretations and not get swept away by emotions, we begin to gain a sense of inner calm, a calm that is key to indestructible self-esteem. How does this help your self-esteem? Think about those times when you've let yourself get carried away with stress or anger and then regretted how you reacted. Those situations tend to undermine our self-esteem because we feel like we've lost control. But when you learn to stay calm in times of adversity, you begin to feel more self-confident. You know that no matter what happens, you have the ability to manage your emotions and respond in a way that reflects who you really are, not simply how you feel at the time. Another important thing the Stoics teach is that emotions are not bad in and of themselves, but what we do with them is what matters. It's not about suppressing what we feel, but about recognizing those emotions, understanding their source, and consciously deciding how to act. When you can do this, you develop a self-confidence that goes beyond any external circumstances, because you know that you are not a slave to your emotions, you own them. If you have an idea, master your anger or it will master you. This idea applies to all emotions. If you let anger, fear, or sadness take the reins, they will drag you down paths you don't want to go down, and that can make you lose confidence in yourself. But when you can stop, breathe, and consciously decide how to act, you realize that you are stronger than you thought. That inner calm is what allows you to maintain a solid self-esteem, even in the most difficult moments. To apply this key to your life, start by observing your emotions when they arise. Don't judge yourself for feeling them, but don't let them take over either. Pause and ask yourself, am I acting based on this emotion or from a place of calm and reason? The pause is what gives you the power to choose how to respond, and over time, this practice will help you feel more in control of yourself, and therefore more confident in your own worth. Staying calm doesn't mean that you never feel intense emotions, but that you learn to manage them in a way that doesn't hurt you or others. And when you can do this, your self-esteem is strengthened, because you know that, no matter what is happening around you, you have the ability to respond calmly and wisely. Third key, find peace in the impermanence of things. One of the hardest realities to accept in life is that everything changes. Nothing is permanent. People come and go, situations get better or worse. Tomorrow it may disappear. For the Stoics, accepting the impermanence of things will be fundamental to achieve inner peace. And when you realize this, you begin to develop a self-esteem that does not depend on external things, because you understand that those things are temporary. Marcus Aurelius explained it very well when he said, "For the Stoics, the world is constantly changing, and fighting against that reality only causes suffering." If you base your self-worth on something as fragile as the stability of the things around you, your possessions, your status, your relationships, you are building your value on something that will inevitably change. Impermanence is not only part of life, it makes life what it is. So how does this affect your self-esteem? If you accept that everything changes, you free yourself from the fear of losing what you have. When you stop holding on to the idea that something must last forever to be valuable, your self-esteem is no longer affected by the losses or changes that inevitably happen. Accept impermanence and that nothing that happens outside of you defines who you are. And that gives you incredible freedom. Imagine going through a breakup, losing a job, or experiencing a disappointment. These are difficult situations that, if you don't handle well, can bring down your self-esteem. But if you remember that everything is impermanent, including the hard times, you can find peace even in the midst of the pain. Because you know that things will change and what hurts today will be just a memory tomorrow. This kind of acceptance not only protects your self-esteem, but helps you keep calm and perspective in the toughest of times. Epictetus also summed it up in a powerful phrase. Don't cling to anything you can't let go of with serenity. This is a fundamental key to indestructible self-esteem. If you become too attached to external things, you become vulnerable to life's inevitable changes. But if you develop the ability to let go, to accept that things come and go, you become stronger internally. Your value no longer depends on what you have, but on who you are in each moment. Accepting impermanence does not mean that you don't care about the people or things you love. It is about recognizing that everything has its time and place. And when that time passes, you can let go without it affecting your sense of self-worth. This not only protects you from fragile self-esteem, but it gives you a serenity that's hard to achieve otherwise. If you point yourself at the things in life and instead of fighting it, you flow with it. When you apply this key to your daily life, you begin to see situations differently. Instead of holding on to what you think should be permanent, you embrace the beauty of the present moment, knowing that nothing lasts forever. This allows you to enjoy more of what you have now, without the constant fear of losing it. And when things change or end, you no longer feel destroyed, because your value does not depend on those things. Your self-esteem remains intact, because you understand that everything is part of the natural flow of life. Impermanence is an inescapable reality, but when you learn to find peace in it, you become invulnerable to the losses and changes that will inevitably occur. Instead of fighting what you cannot control, you learn to let go and trust in your ability to adapt. And with that adaptation comes a self-esteem that doesn't falter in the face of life's ups and downs. So, every time you face change or loss, remind yourself, this too shall pass. This simple phrase connects you to the nature of the world to have your sense of worth intact, because at the end of the day, the only thing permanent is your own ability to adapt, to grow, and to find strength within yourself no matter what happens outside. Fourth key, own your thoughts. This is perhaps one of the most powerful and transformative teachings of Stoicism. Learn to own your thoughts. For Stoics, what really defines our experience of life is not external events, but how we interpret and react to them. In other words, what happens outside of you is neutral. What matters is what you think about it. Epictetus made it very clear when he said, "It is not things that affect us, but our opinion about them." This phrase has immense depth, because it reminds you that while you cannot control what happens in the world, you do have the power to control how you perceive it. And when you become the master of your thoughts, you begin to see that many of the things that used to affect you deeply don't really have the power to do so unless you give it to them. How does this relate to self-esteem? Your self-esteem is often directly connected to the thoughts you have about yourself. If you constantly tell yourself that you're not good enough, that you fail, or that you don't have the value that others have, it's inevitable that your self-esteem will suffer. But if you take control of those thoughts and replace them with a more constructive narrative, you begin to build a solid self-esteem based on a more realistic and healthy perception of yourself. The reality is that, on a day-to-day basis, our mind is constantly generating thoughts, some positive and some negative. The Stoics invite us to pay attention to those thoughts and not to let ourselves be carried away by them automatically. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." This means that if you strive to maintain constructive, serene, and reality-based thoughts, your self-esteem will benefit enormously. But here's an important point. Owning your thoughts does not mean ignoring negative thoughts or forcing toxic positivity. Rather, it's about observing your thoughts objectively, without judging them or holding on to them. If a negative thought arises, such as "I am not enough," instead of simply accepting it as truth, you can stop, examine it, and ask yourself, is this thought really reflecting reality? Is it helping me or limiting me? This simple act of questioning your thoughts changes the game. You realize that not every thought that passes through your mind is true, and that you have the power to choose which one is to keep and which one is to let go. This gives you tremendous control over your inner life because you are no longer the victim of your thoughts but the architect of them. Seneca also reminded us of the importance that man suffers more in imagination than in reality. Often, the thoughts that cause us pain are not based on what is really happening, but on our exaggerated or distorted interpretations of events. By taking control of those thoughts, you can reduce unnecessary suffering and maintain a more balanced self-esteem. If you want to explain this key in your daily life, start by paying attention to the thoughts that arise when you face challenges or situations that make you doubt yourself. Are they empowering thoughts or are they limiting thoughts? If they are the latter, don't automatically accept them. Ask yourself if those thoughts are really helpful, and if they are not, replace them with a more realistic or constructive perspective. This doesn't mean ignoring difficulties or convincing yourself that everything is fine when it's not. Rather, it is about training your mind to see things more objectively and to not allow negative thoughts to take over without question. You can't control everything that happens in life, but you can control how you interpret those situations. And that gives you incredible inner strength because your self-esteem is no longer at the mercy of life's ups and downs, but is based on your ability to consciously manage your own thoughts. Face the fear of failure. Fear of failure is one of the most common and paralyzing emotions we all experience at some point in our lives. We dread the thought of failing to live up to expectations, failing in the eyes of others, or worse, failing in front of ourselves. However, for the Stoics, failure was not something to fear. They saw it as an invaluable opportunity to grow, learn, and strengthen ourselves. Epictetus put it very simply but profoundly. It is hard to endure training, but then we go through life as victors. What this means is that failure, like hard training, is part of the process that prepares you to face life's challenges. If you avoid failure, you are denying yourself the chance to improve and develop a self-esteem that is truly indestructible. The key is not to avoid failure, but to change your relationship to it. Instead of seeing it as something negative, start seeing it as a teacher, as an inevitable part of growth. Stoicism teaches us that the real value is not in how many times we avoid failure, but how we respond when we do. If every time you face a setback you stop to lament, your self-esteem will suffer because your perception of yourself will be conditioned by immediate success. But when you realize that each failure is simply a stepping stone to growth, your self-esteem does not falter. In fact, it grows stronger. Seneca put it this way: "He who has learned to die has unlearned to be a slave." In this context, dying could be interpreted as learning to fail without fear. Because once you free yourself from the fear of failure, you are no longer a slave to it. You stop living with that constant pressure to be perfect or to always succeed. And when you free yourself from that pressure, you discover that you can do what you thought you could do. How does this affect your self-esteem? It's simple. If your self-esteem depends on never failing, it will be fragile because failure is inevitable. But if you accept that failure is part of the process, your self-esteem becomes much stronger because you understand that your value is not determined by a single outcome, but by your ability to learn and move forward. In other words, your self-esteem stops being an all or nothing based on success and starts to be a reflection of your resilience and personal growth. To apply this key to your life, start by changing your perception of failure. The next time you fail at something, whether it's a project, a relationship, or even a small goal, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How is this failure helping me to be better? This simple mindset shift will help you see failure as a tool, not an obstacle. It is also important to remember that no one, not even the greatest philosophers or leaders, has achieved success without first facing multiple failures. Marcus Aurelius, the first emperor, faced great challenges and failures during his lifetime. But what distinguished him was his ability to stand firm, learn from each situation, and continue to act with integrity and virtue regardless of the results. That is the real secret to developing indestructible self-esteem. Fear of failure often comes from the idea that failure defines us, that if we fail, it says something about our value as a person. But the Stoics invite us to question that idea. Failure does not define who you are. What defines who you are is how you choose to respond when things don't go as you expected. Do you stop and give up, or do you pick yourself up and move forward with more wisdom and experience than before? The last time you feel that fear of failure, remember, it's not the end of the world and it says nothing about your worth. It's just a natural part of the process of learning, growing, and becoming a better version of yourself. And when you accept this, when you face failure with courage, your self-esteem stops depending on whether you win or lose. It starts to be based on your ability to persist, which makes you that much stronger. Practice gratitude for what you have now. In modern society, it is very easy to fall into the trap of always wanting more. More success, more money, more recognition. We live in a world that constantly bombards us with the idea that we must keep seeking what we don't have in order to be happy. But for the Stoics, the real strength of your self-esteem lies not in what you have not yet achieved, but in learning to appreciate and be grateful for what you already have. Seneca said, "It is not the lack of what we have that makes us unhappy, but the lack of gratitude for what we already have." This simple truth is key to building solid self-esteem. When you live in a constant state of discontent, when you need more to feel valuable, you are perpetually dissatisfied. And that dissatisfaction erodes your self-esteem because something always seems to be missing to make you feel full. But when you practice gratitude, when you really stop to appreciate what is already present in your life, your perspective changes completely. Gratitude is not just a warm and fuzzy feeling, but a powerful technique. By stopping to reflect on the things you have now, your health, your relationships, your accomplishments, and even the little everyday things, you realize that you are already valuable enough. The need to seek external validation diminishes because you learn to see the value in what you have already accomplished. Who are you today? Marcus Aurelius, when he invited us to receive all that comes by fitting it in as if you had wished for it. This applies not only to external circumstances, but also to what you already have in life. The problem is that we often take for granted what we have because we are too focused on what we lack. But when you take the time to recognize what is already in your life, what you thought, and your self-esteem is nourished by that sense of abundance. How does gratitude affect your self-esteem? It's simple. When you are constantly in a state of lack, thinking about what you don't have, you inevitably begin to feel that you are not enough. But when you focus on what you already have, you realize that you don't need more to be valuable. You're fine just the way you are. Gratitude gives you a much stronger self-esteem. You're no longer chasing the idea that you'll be happy when you get something else. You're happy now because you already have reason to be grateful. Another powerful thing about gratitude is that it changes the way you look at challenges and difficult times. Instead of seeing only what went wrong, gratitude helps you see that you don't have to be nervous in the midst of adversity. This gives you incredible resilience because you no longer see the world through the lens of lack. You see every situation as an opportunity to learn, grow, and appreciate what you have. Epictetus also expressed it in a very direct way. Wealth is not about having great possessions. Gratitude helps you reduce those artificial needs that we often build in our minds. We tell ourselves that we need X or Y to feel complete. But the truth is, when you're grateful for what you have, you realize that you need much less than you thought you did to be at peace with yourself. And that realization is incredibly liberating. To apply this key to your life, start by making gratitude a daily practice. Take a moment at the end of each day to reflect on 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be huge things. In fact, it's often the small things that have the most profound impact. It can be something as simple as enjoying a good meal, or having a meaningful conversation with a friend, or accomplishing something at work. This practice of gratitude will not only help you shift your focus from lack to abundance, but it will also strengthen your self-esteem. When you realize that you already have so much to be grateful for, your perception of yourself changes. You are no longer looking for validation in external or future things because you understand that you are already valuable as you are with what you have now. One of the fundamental pillars of Stoicism is the idea that our happiness and well-being should not depend on external factors. And this includes our emotions, especially those related to other people. People teach us not to be emotionally dependent on what others think, say, or do, because in the end we have no control over them. If we base our self-esteem on the validation or affection of others, we are building on shaky ground. Epictetus summed it up very clearly. He who cares too much about what others think will always be their slave. And it is true. When our emotions depend on the opinion of others or how they treat us, we are surrendering our power and with it, our self-esteem. We become hostage to the circumstances and people around us. But if we cultivate emotional independence, our self-esteem is strengthened. This does not mean that we should be indifferent or emotionally disconnected from the people around us. In fact, the Stoics deeply valued human relationships and compassion. What they were advocating was the idea that our emotions and our personal value should not be completely dependent on those relationships. That is, you can enjoy and value others without depending on them to make you feel complete. How does this affect your self-esteem? If you are always looking for approval, affection, or validation from others, your self-esteem will be constantly at stake, fluctuating depending on how they treat you or what they think of you. But when you develop emotional independence, your value no longer depends on external acceptance. You know who you are and don't need others to confirm it. This gives you a solid foundation on which to build your confidence and security. Marcus Aurelius also talked about this in his Meditations. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, not on external circumstances. This includes our relationships. If you allow happiness or sadness to depend on how others treat you, your self-esteem is like an emotional roller coaster. But if you decide that your inner well-being is something you control, you become much stronger. And that reflects directly on your self-esteem. One of the most practical ways to cultivate emotional independence is to observe your reactions when you feel hurt, rejected, or misunderstood by someone. If so, ask yourself, why am I allowing this person or this situation to determine my value? This simple act of questioning helps you become aware of where you are putting your emotional power and, more importantly, allows you to take it back. When you practice emotional independence, you begin to realize that you are not really in control of what others think of you, how they treat you, or whether they accept you, but you can control how you choose to interpret those situations and how you allow them to affect you. This is one of the greatest acts of liberation you can do for your self-esteem. This does not mean that you will never feel hurt or disappointed by others. We are human and emotions are inevitable. What the Stoics teach us is that we must not get caught up in those emotions or allow them to determine our self-worth. You can feel the pain, but you can also remind yourself that that pain does not define who you are. Seneca put it so wisely, "The most powerful man is he who has power over himself." What is the same is having power over our emotions. It does not mean repressing them or ignoring them, but understanding that we should not depend on them to feel valuable. When you achieve this emotional independence, your self-esteem is no longer tied to the ups and downs of your relationships or how others perceive you. It becomes something deeper, more stable. To apply this key to your life, you should think about observing in what situations you feel emotionally dependent on others. Perhaps it is the approval of a boss, the affection of a partner, or the acceptance of a group of friends. When you notice that your emotional well-being is closely tied to these situations, remind yourself that you cannot control others, but you can control your response. In this moment, you will be empowering yourself to define your own value without depending on what others think or do. One of the greatest lessons of Stoicism is the ability to let go. The Stoics understood that holding on to what no longer serves you, whether thoughts, relationships, objects, or expectations, are the main causes of suffering. Learning to let go is not simply a matter of superficial detachment, but a profound way to free your mind and strengthen your self-esteem. By letting go of what is unnecessary, you create space for what really matters. Epictetus summed it up brilliantly. Don't look for things to happen the way you want them to happen. Let it happen and you'll be fine. We often cling to ideas of how things should be, how others should behave, or what we should have accomplished to feel valuable. But those expectations, when not met, can wear down our self-esteem, making us feel that we have failed or that we are not enough. Letting go is not an act of resignation, but of wisdom. Recognizing that some things, situations, or people no longer have a positive purpose in your life and letting them go is an act of strength, not weakness. By letting go, you take control of your life because you are no longer chaining yourself to what you cannot change or what is holding you back. How does letting go affect your self-esteem? When you hold on to what no longer serves you, be it old beliefs, toxic relationships, or goals that are no longer relevant, your self-esteem suffers because you are holding on to something that limits you. But when you learn to let go, you free yourself from those unnecessary weights and regain your energy. Letting go is not an act of desperation and more self-confident. Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations said, "Remove the opinion and the complaint dissipates. Remove the complaint and the suffering dissipates." This reflects the idea that many times what causes us discomfort is not what happens, but how we hold on to certain expectations or ideas. When you learn to let go of those expectations and accept reality as it is, you begin to feel an inner peace that strengthens your self-esteem. Because you no longer feel enslaved to what should be, but you accept what is and work with it. Letting go does not mean that you don't care about anything. It means you consciously choose what you give your energy to and what you decide to leave behind. It is not healthy. A job that no longer fulfills you or a belief about yourself that limits you. By letting go of those things, you take back control of your life and give yourself the opportunity to grow. And with that growth, your self-esteem flourishes. Another important thing about the act of letting go is that it's not always something you do all at once. Sometimes it's a gradual process. Sometimes you find yourself holding on to certain emotions or thoughts without even realizing it. But the more you practice letting go, the easier it becomes. And with each thing you let go, you become more aware of what really matters in your life. Seneca also invites us to reflect on this when he says, "Life is long if you know how to live it." Part of knowing how to live it is not wasting your time and energy on things that no longer bring you value. If you hold on to what is holding you back, you will never be able to move lightly toward what really matters to you. But when you let go of what doesn't serve you, you realize that life is full of possibilities and your self-esteem is boosted by that sense of freedom. To apply this key to your life, start by identifying what things are holding you back. It could be a relationship, a negative thought pattern, an unmet expectation, or even a habit that no longer benefits you. Ask yourself, is this contributing to my well-being and growth, or is it holding me back? If the answer is the latter, start working on letting go. It won't be easy at first, because the future is an unnecessary burden and allows you to move forward with greater self-confidence. Ninth key, embrace the present and stop worrying about the future. We come to one of the most important keys and perhaps one of the most difficult to apply in daily life, learning to live in the present. The future, with its uncertainties, fears, and expectations, allows us to control our peace of mind and weaken our self-esteem. The Stoics teach us to stop worrying about what is to come, because the only moment we really have control over is the present. And when you learn to embrace the now, your self-esteem is strengthened, because you are no longer trapped in the anxiety of your life. Trust in the present. Everything else is beyond you. This means that although the future is uncertain and will not always be in your control, what you can control is how you live in the present moment. Worrying about the future is something that consumes an enormous amount of energy, and that energy, instead of strengthening you, can eliminate you from yourself, generate insecurity, and, ultimately, can undermine your self-esteem. When you live constantly worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, you disconnect from the only moment that really matters, the here and now. The problem is that by being so focused on what could go wrong in the future, we neglect what we can do today. When you learn to focus on the present and do your best in every moment, you realize that the future is no longer so scary, because you understand that the best way to prepare for whatever comes is to act well right now. Epictetus also offers us a key insight for dealing with this worry about the future. It is not the burden that breaks you, but the way you carry it. Worrying about the future is like carrying a backpack full of rocks that you don't even need to carry. If you focus on what you can do today, on the decisions you can make now, you stop worrying so much about what's to come. And that, in itself, gives you a greater sense of control and, therefore, stronger self-esteem. How does this affect your self-esteem? When you're constantly looking toward the future with fear or anxiety, you start to feel like you're not in control of your life, which can make you feel small or inadequate. But when you turn your attention to the present and focus on what you can do now, you begin to regain your sense of agency. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become the author of your own life. This change of focus strengthens your self-esteem, because you are no longer paralyzed by fear of what might happen, but empowered by what you can do today. Living in the present does not mean ignoring the future or not planning. Rather, it is about not letting anxiety about what might happen keep you from enjoying and taking advantage of the present moment. The future is just a series of presents that are yet to come. If you focus on doing the best you can now, you will be better prepared for what is to come, without needing to burden yourself with useless worries. Another important aspect of this key is that when you live in the present, you also free yourself from the expectations you often place on yourself for the future. Expectations are so high that when you fall short of them, your self-esteem takes a hit. But if you learn to focus on what you can do now without obsessing about a perfect outcome in the future, you begin to feel more in control of your life and less dependent on whether things go exactly as planned. Seneca reminded us of something very valuable: true happiness in the present without anxious dependence on the future. When you allow yourself to live fully in the now, you discover that happiness and self-esteem depend not on what might happen later, but on how you choose to act and feel today. And that is one of the most liberating lessons of Stoicism. To apply this key to your daily life, practice mindfulness. When you notice your mind racing ahead, worrying about what might happen, stop and ask yourself, what can I do right now in this moment that is truly in my control? By refocusing your energy on the present, you realize that there are many things you can do today that will prepare you for the future, without the need to anticipate problems that don't yet exist. Comment wisdom to let us know you made it to this part of the video. Don't forget to click like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more valuable content from us. Challenge yourself to apply at least one of these strategies in your daily life. Then come back here and comment, "I did," sharing your feelings about the changes in your life. I am always here to listen and share with you. Let the Stoic philosophy be your companion, helping you find peace and strength in your life's journey.